Thank you for our director, Carlos, for inviting me to make this presentation. Chile is my case. And first, a word because I am reading it. At the Institute, I have discovered that the only way to say something in 5 minutes is bring it right in. One main problem of Palermo, as is known, the 2000 United Nations Convention against Organized Transnational Crime, is that, strangely enough, it lacks a good definition of what precisely means transnational organized crime. Chile is a case of hybrid warfare in which organized crime is used against democracy. It has happened for years without the country reacting against it. This has taken place in governments as different as Piñera's center-right in 2018-2022, and the left-wing one of Boris, inaugurated in 2022, being the main factor that for many years Chile has lacked a vision of the problems and potential of the country in strategic terms, because the long term has been lost. Chile does not have an state intelligence institutionality worth of that name. Not now, not during the whole 21st century, because during the 17 years of the Pinochet dictatorship, civilian and military intelligence was used to suppress dissidents and Democrats. And as a result, the only professional intelligence the country has is in the armed forces, with the limitation that they are legally forbidden to use it for any purpose other than war. It is difficult to understand why after so many years the situation has not been solved. Lacking a true intelligence service has been bad for the country and the state, and both transnational organized crime and national organized crime have taken advantage. First, the country could have lost its democratic system when, surprisingly, in October 2019, an acute violence erupted in the streets, and as a consequence, a constitutional process was started which proposed a radical new constitution to completely change the country that has evolved since independence for 2 centuries. Happily, the Chileans rejected it in a plebiscite, but the Boris government was elected as part of that political climate. In the violence, a very prominent role was played by the so-called first line of young soldiers of drug trafficking. Secondly, for around 3 decades, Chile has had a low-intensity guerrilla warfare in the south of the country. It was presented as a reivindication of the Mapuche ethnic minority, but in the past has had links with the Colombian FARC guerrilla, and today with drug and illicit timber trafficking by white gangs. In any case, there are places in that region where the state is totally absent. Thirdly, the structural weakness of the country was such that the Venezuelan dictatorship took advantage, and organized crime was used to kidnap, torture, and murder Lieutenant Ojeda, a military dissident who had been granted political asylum. The Tren of Aragua was used and paid for this crime. Until then, it was not clear to everyone how deep was the relationship between organized crime and foreign intrusion. But after this killing, there was no doubt, because it was clear to everyone how weak was the Chile and the system which was supposed to protect the country. At the end, the system for criminal prosecution, which is independent, got evidence that the one behind the murder was no one else than Diosdado Cabello himself. Information that was taken to the International Criminal Court by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs without any answer to this date. In any case, the judicial process is alive, and only last week, 3 members of the Tren of Aragua were extradited from the United States to Chile. Today, the country is suffering clear signs of penetration of transnational organized crime in several areas. First, in everyday life and culture, a sign of which is how daily activities like transport and schools cannot take place when streets are taken by narco funerals, which, by the way, are broadcast live by national TV. Second, the sicariato is today part of Chile, with substantial amount of guns and murderers being in their hands. And the related crime frequently takes place when kidnappings for ransom have become the new normal in the country. Lastly, as a drug transit country, Chilean ports have consolidated as a preferred route to send Bolivian and Peruvian cocaine to Europe, at the same time that per capita drug consumption in Chile is higher than Colombia. Transnational organized crime is big business in such a way that they have taken over the northern border for illegal immigration purposes. And also, as a business, there are massive land grabs in which thousands of poor Chileans and poor immigrants are sold land by organizers, mostly drug gangs. It has had also political consequence. This November, there are presidential elections in Chile, next month, and the feeling of insecurity is such that has become the #1 issue to decide winners and losers in the general elections. And according to the new polls, the new president will be one of the 3 right-wing candidates defeating the left. Another political outcome already took place because the criminal activity sponsored by Venezuela and the permanent rhetoric from Caracas produce a political distancing between someone who had been in the past a supporter of Chavismo, as was the case of President Boric, who started to blame Maduro for many of the problems, so he called Venezuela a dictatorship, though he has never said nothing against the mother of all dictatorship, as it is the Cuban Revolution. In Chile, and with this I finish, it was drug trafficking which changed criminal activity because it started to have territorial control and better arms than the police, at the same time that corruption made its way to local governments and municipalities, with politicians having close ties with organized crimes. And common to the rest of the region, the country as such and the political class have not been able neither to have public policies nor the will to successfully defeat organized crime. Democracy and its quality are already losing the battle as is happening in other countries. Audacity and more regional solidarity among democracies is urgently needed, as it's also to look to the United States as a partner and not as a foe. And thank you.